Awesome. So as you're signing in, we're just gonna intro how to participate in this webinar. You can go ahead and put your name and where you're signing in from in the chat. Everyone who's participating in this will be muted with their videos off, and just the presenters will be speaking and sharing their screen. Throughout the workshop, as you have questions, you can put those in the Q&A section of the Zoom screen, and we'll be pausing intermittently to address the questions by section. And then we'll end with a Q&A at the end as well. As far as the chat goes, they've been really lively and engaging the past few workshops, which has been awesome. And so please do continue to comment, add insight, share your experience, and engage with us through that way in the chat. Just please do keep it on topic, because these are saved, and then we'll go out with the live recording. As far as the live recording goes, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and the chat, and registration for future webinars later this week. And without any further ado, we will kick off this workshop. So I'm Kait Boyle. I am a founder of Bikepacking Roots and work on the education and community side of our programming. For Noelle Battle, our current and new this year executive director, who's at the helm and here on this webinar as well. If you've been at past webinars, she's been facilitating the questions and comments, but this webinar we have a speaker who I will talk about in a moment. So Bikepacking Roots is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are a member-driven organization with over 17,000 members. By signing up for one of these, you automatically become a member. Our mission is centered around 3 pillars for roots, community, and advocacy. And ultimately, our goal is to advocate for bikepackers and the landscape through which we ride. This series of 8 virtual workshops is built on the Bikepacker's Guide, which you can buy online. It was recently revised in its 2nd edition this last year. And these webinars are covering a variety of topics to give bikepackers new and experienced additional tools for enhancing your bikepacking experience and lowering the barriers to bikepacking. So this one is the 4th of the series. Thanks for everyone who's joined so far. And if you're new, welcome. And I hope that you consider joining the next ones. This topic is one that I'm really excited about. It's our first guest lecturer, and that will be Eric Parsons, the founder and owner of Revelate Designs. And he's going to be talking about bikepacking gear, specifically the bags that we rely on for going back bikepacking. If you've been here in the past, you've heard how I started bikepacking with just a alpine climbing backpack, and how it was not the way to go about riding the Kokopelli Trail, but quickly learned about Revelate Designs in 2010, and that I've been riding with those bags since then all around the world. So I'm excited for Eric to be here to talk about the fabrics, the technical side of building bike bags, how we as users of them can be taking care of them and repairing them. And I think he's going to surprise us with how into it we dive. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to him for a bit more of an introduction and the rest of the evening's programming.
Thanks, Kait. Okay, I guess I'm on. Well, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for everyone tuning in. It's pretty exciting, especially when I heard how many people tuned into these. I was like, oh, pressure's on. Anyhow, yeah, no, I'm really excited to talk about what I have to share with you. When Kait first pitched this, I threw out some ideas of like, oh, we could do repair and like DIY stuff. But then as I started putting it together, I was like, oh, I'm really actually in like a pretty good place to try to do some education on what makes outdoor gear and bikepacking gear like what it is. Like, what are the numbers when you're looking at things? Like what, when you're reading marketing hype, what does it all mean? And so I'd like to take you on a little nerd out fabric, textile rabbit hole here a little bit. Oh, wait. Okay, I guess I was just supposed to show you that slide. Yeah, so this is kind of what we're going to cover to some extent or another. Yeah, we're going to try to gain a working knowledge of materials and construction. I'm not going to read it verbatim here. Learn some simple gear repair techniques and maintenance stuff. And I'd love to, for you to walk away from this feeling like, what it says, empower yourself to change, modify, fix and, fix your own stuff, and make it, exactly how you want it, maybe. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end about, how the bags are really supposed to function and just adopting the best mindsets for packing strategy for the trips you're going on. All right. So this is our workshop in Anchorage. That's literally what it looks like. I'm not there now because I didn't really have a good place to do this, but this is where we live and breathe day in, day out. It's just like kind of machines and tables and junk everywhere, but it's a great place to prototype and design stuff. Not seen to the left is sort of like all kind of office area. To the right, and we have, this is the newest chaos that we have going on. We got a new puppy. And so there's just been a lot of fun dog action lately. I really know Kate wanted to see this over everything else. So it's keeping us busy. Let's see if I can move on. Uh-oh. Stuck on dogs. Oh, man. We're gonna just have to look at puppies for the next hour. All right, let's do it the old-fashioned way here. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's talk about fabric. In general, the stuff everything's made out of is woven fabric, right? But then, when you read something, you're like, oh, this is 200D ripstop. Well, what does that mean, right? Well, the D stands for denier. Some of you may know that. Sometimes it even says denier. But what's a denier, right? So denier is the weight of a really long piece of the individual yarns making up the weave. So the leftmost photo there, you see a whole bunch of fibers coming off that woven there. So each one of those is a yarn that makes the weave, right? And so if you take one of those yarns and make it like 900 meters long, it's like the weight of it. So, the heavier that weight is, generally the bigger diameter that fiber is. And then, yeah, so the higher the denier, the heavier the fabric generally. And then kind of the coarser the weave is going to be. So it's like if you're weaving together bigger diameter filaments, it's just going to be burlier and stronger and heavier. Yeah, that's basically what the denier means, is like it's the actual fiber size in these wovens. Since I'm talking about that leftmost photo, it's kind of interesting because there's different fibers going on there, and that's something we'll kind of keep talking about. That actually is the Challenge 200 UPE fabric that I'm going to try to keep this anti-Revelate, but it's like some companies are making things out of these days. And so the white yarns are, really strong UHMWPE fibers. We'll talk more about that later, but it's like you can mix and match. You can have some fibers that are bigger or stronger than the other, and then some that are lighter. Kind of in the middle, we have just a pretty generic double ripstop. And so you can see you got the blue fibers that are dyed blue, and then you have these black yarns in there. And the yarns are, the black yarns are actually stronger than the blue polyester. But they're basically the same size. Sometimes they're not always the same size. Sometimes the ripstops will be quite a bit bigger than the adjacent weave, which is what you can kind of see in the rightmost image, where you have these bigger ripstops and then smaller, smaller weave, smaller weave in there. And usually the bigger ripstop, usually the fabric is sized on the base weave, not the ripstop size weave. So it's like you might have a 210 denier ripstop, but those bigger fibers might be 400 or 600 or who knows, but it basically goes off of the base weave. I have on the top there non-woven. There's not much non-wovens found in bikepacking gear. Generally, that's either like a pure laminated, like the lightest weight. For those of you familiar with like Dyneema tents and stuff, those aren't. We'll get into this later as well, but it's generally like they like lay out yarns of fiber, and they just sort of like stick stuff to them, and that's like a non-woven fabric. And then the other thing is like knits. There's a lot of like knits and especially clothing. Your socks aren't woven, they're like knit together. So that kind of stuff. Okay. What did I title this? Okay, we'll talk about coatings. I can't really see what I titled this slide, but that's okay. So this is just talking about different constructions of fabric. So okay, you have like your base weave of something. Now like generally what you put on it or stick to it or glue to it is what really defines its characteristics. Because if you just weave together a bunch of polyester, it's just going to leak like a sieve and be really kind of loose and sort of, fray like crazy. So it's like you have to do something to it. The most basic thing everyone's familiar with is just polyurethane coating. It's like the oldest trick in the book, been around forever. You basically just take fabric and you run it through a trough of polyurethane. There's a lot of ways to do it, and let it dry, and there you go. It's generally waterproof, but if you've had, it's gotten better over the years, but it can break down. Like a basic polyurethane coating can break down over time, and sometimes you'll see like if you like crease things a lot, you'll get a little bit of like flaking. If you've had like some backpack for like 10 years, you'll notice like there's like white stuff coming off of it, and that's the polyurethane coating just aging out, and it'll start not being water resistant or waterproof in that spot. So the middle is kind of what we're talking about in the sailcloth world. The sailcloth stuff in the outdoor industry has kind of come into play in the last 15 years. It was kind of like right when I was getting Revelate started was when Dimension Polyant, who's like a major sailcloth company, started making outdoor weight fabrics for backpacks and stuff. And turns out they're really pretty good for bike bags too. And so what we got going on here is, different layers that are just basically glued together with some sort of adhesive. So generally speaking, there's let's see, and the outer fabric would be like a 200 denier, just nylon or polyester weave. And then you're starting to add layers to it. And it can be any number of things. There can be a plastic film, like a really, really, really thin plastic film. And then you see these big X grids. That was something that was carried over from the sailing industry for like, to prevent like bias stretch. Like bias is anything on like a 45-degree angle to a weave. So if you have like a weave, you have like X and Y basically, and it's strong in both directions, but if you twist it sideways, that's the bias stretch. And so the sailcloth companies started gluing in these giant crossways yarns essentially to kind of cut down on the bias stretch of sails. And they thought it was a good idea to put in outdoor fabric too. And it looks cool. Sometimes it's not all that necessary because all these other layers stuck together kind of gives us the amount of stretch resistance we need in the panel size that we have, but it's still there. And then in that top one as well, there's a really, really lightweight ripstop against that X grid I told you about. All right, that was a lot of talking. The one below it is again, it's sort of it's just a it's a PET film, which is just a plastic film layer, kind of like Mylar, that's then stuck to polyester fabric. And it's not coated. It's not, it's just like you're just sticking layers together, and that's the construction. And there's different pros and cons to all the different constructions, I guess you could say. The last one I want to talk about here is TPU-based fabrics. TPU-based fabrics are heavily used in like dry bags for one, like rafts. Actually, the fabric picture there is some fabric that Alpaca Raft uses. And essentially you're taking a woven, like just a woven nylon or woven polyester, and you're gluing really, really thin TPU, TPU is thermoplastic urethane. And it's different from just a PU coating because it's not just like a liquid that they're coating. It's actually a film that's really thin and transparent, and they're laminating it to the material. And then you get different thicknesses of that film. And what that film lets you do is then, turns out TPU is really, really works well with heat and welding and all these other like bonding techniques. So it's like once you have a TPU film on something, you can do a lot of things to it with bag making. Well, cool. Nylons and polyesters. Okay. Nylons and polyesters kind of work hand in hand a little bit, but there's pretty key differences. Like in general, I hate to make broad, like sweeping statements, but it's like nylon is generally a little stronger than polyester, but then polyester has much better like UV resistance. The other major deciding factor now is that we can easily get recycled polyester fabric, and you can't get recycled nylon, like basically at all. So for Revelate, at least, it's sort of been like we've changed everything to polyester like years ago with all of our stuff. The other benefit polyester has is that it doesn't, the dye, it doesn't fade as much with UV and like dyes. Just color fading isn't as bad. It's especially bad with anything like red or kind of bright pigmented, but yeah. I guess that's all I could say about that. The UHMWPE stuff, this is something everybody likes to talk about because it's pretty nerdy. It's pretty like, it's really interesting. It's high tech. It's expensive. And so I'd love to talk about this a little bit. So UHMWPE is ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, right? It's just a chemical composition. Dyneema is a name brand, manufacturer of it that then, makes fabrics and stuff. There's also Spectra, there's others, but we kind of always call things Dyneema, even if it's not actually a Dyneema fabric. But anyway, these photos show a couple different compositions of it. All the way on the left is a non-woven, and this is the stuff that you would see like ultralight tents made out of, where it's just basically a film, and they have strands of UHMWPE running in one direction. Maybe they're also running in another direction, and it's just they like basically adhere to super thin layers of plastic to it, and that's it. It's a little sandwich, and that's it. And it's really, it's generally really strong in tensile strength, but it has like really low abrasion resistance because there's really nothing there. You're just kind of like rubbing plastic apart, and then you get into the fibers, and then you're in trouble. The other thing with that non-woven is that you can't really sew anything structural with it. If you sew something, it's just sort of to hold it together until you can tape it or bond it or glue it somehow. So anytime you see something sewn out of that material, there's almost always a piece of seam tape or some sort of reinforcement on that, or it's just sort of stuck together with like double-sided tape methods or something else. Okay, the next photo, which is the one just to the right of it, is sort of the same fabric as the one on the left, but it has another layer of a really light woven on it. And that's a Dyneema fabric. And that's a lot more durable. You can sew with it, but then you can also tape the one side of it that still has the shiny side. Because remember, we're just sticking a really light woven on one side, and the other side is still like the plastic side. And that's a lot better. The problem is the really light weave is just a really light weave of polyester. It's actually roughly the same stuff used on the inside face of the sailcloth fabrics, which is only like a 50 denier polyester. And there's a whole lot of different constructions. Like there's a 50 denier, and then there's a 150, and they get a little bit beefier. But generally speaking, even that doesn't hold up that well with bike bags because we have straps and things that just sort of long-term rub in the same spot with them. Yeah, we made a whole bunch of stuff out of that stuff for years, and it's nice, it's light, but in the end of the day, like the longevity didn't really pan out with the price and the expectations of everybody. Whereas you can make a backpack out of it, and as long as the bottom isn't made out of that, it generally survives a little bit longer. The best stuff we've found is as we start to get into like woven kind of blends, and that's the photo on the right. It's the same stuff as what I showed you in that close-up image, but so that has the super strong UHMWPE fibers, but is woven intermixed with polyester. And it's all pretty big yarn sizes. Remember we talked about denier a little bit ago. It's like they're fairly large denier fibers. So you kind of get the strength and the tear resistance. Like if I try to cut into that with a scissor, it's really hard. It's actually like our nemesis. Like when you're prototyping something with that stuff, you kind of can't use scissors because it's like you have to either sharpen them every day, or it just sucks because it's like you're constantly like anyway, that stuff is held up really well, and sort of the direction I think a lot of like the ultra, the more lightweight high end stuff is going. Let's see here. Okay. Construction methods. This is a fun one to talk about. So starting on the left again, that's kind of my sewing machine I use all the time, day in, day out. It's just a needle feed sewing machine. Doesn't matter. It's just a sewing machine, right? Puts holes in things. When and you can make anything sewn, and like a lot of people, there's just a lot of emphasis on waterproofing, right? So like what can you can't do. And so this gets to be an interesting conversation of like, well, what can you do equipment wise, and then what does the fabric support? Okay, because not everything works with everything else. So directly underneath the sewing machine is just a picture of a taped seam, but that stuff is from the previous slide. It's the UHMWP fabric that just has that plastic film on it. And okay, that plastic film is great. It's nice and shiny, but you can't really use like heat activated processes, which is like kind of the most automatic kind of continuous operation thing. So you have to put that stuff on by hand and then push it in really nicely and kind of hope for the best. So it's a really slow hand process. And you're also very much limited by geometry. Like if you're doing that by hand, think about when you get to a curve, like, well, what do? Everything starts creasing and folding and nothing really is laying down in the right way. So it has limitations as far as what you can actually make waterproof with hand sewing things. In the middle is a hot air welding machine or a seam taping machine, kind of to each his own. Like that's a hot air welding machine. A seam taping machine is generally a little bit smaller. It looks sort of like it's more of like a sewing machine, like table setup. But the general principle is you got two rollers, which is like there's a roller on the bottom and there's a roller on the top, and you sort of hit a pedal, and the orange thing with the nozzle comes in and blasts like 500-degree air like right at the junction. And so while you're doing that, you can have tape that feeds in, and you're hitting the tape and you're hitting the fabric at the same time, and it all melts together. Beautiful, right? If any of you have an alpaca pack raft, that's how they're all taped and put together. If any of you have ever owned a rain jacket, that's how they're made waterproof, is with a seam taping machine. So, the cool thing is now you can do like complex geometry, you can do curves, and sort of the sky's the limit, generally speaking. Of course, to do this, you have to have the chemistry working between the bag, like the bag fabric and the tape. And so they all have to be compatible. And so TPU is the most friendly. It's like the most kind of developed ecosystem for this. Like if you have a TPU-based fabric, it's super easy to get a TPU-based tape that can melt and just, seam seal it all together. Same thing with like knits. So it's like, your Gore-Tex jacket, stuff like that. It's like no problem. The main thing though is it's hot air, right? So you're blasting hot air. If the material has a heat sensitivity, then all bets are off. And a lot of those lightweight, the Dyneema-based stuff has a very low temperature threshold, and so you can destroy and distort, and you can trash anything with the hot air on that. And so there's a fine line, I guess you could say. What else do I want to say about that? Not much. All right. The last thing is an RF welding machine, and those work with radio frequency waves. And so it has a radio frequency wave generator, and it basically sort of like two pieces just come together, two aluminum shapes, and they can kind of be whatever shape you want them to be, come together, and just sort of like fuses the fabric together. This radio frequency energy comes together and it just starts jiggling the molecules and creates energy, and it just fuses them together. It welds it together. So that's what that lower picture is a RF welded seam. It's easiest to do like just straight bar welds like that with that. And then with tooling, with like different shapes of these aluminum blocks that you put in underneath the press, then you can get into complex shapes. And you'll see that all over kind of outdoor gear market is these welded shapes, and it's actually made with sort of these big aluminum fitting molds, basically, and then put into one of these machines that basically fuses the parts together in that shape. For this to work, again, you need the right fabric chemistry. They have to be kind of the same material. TPU is kind of its best friend, generally speaking. And the other thing is which side thing, which, like, do you want to go like this, or do you want to go like this? Because if you want to go like overlapping, kind of like that photo has, that means you have to have the TPU on both the top and the bottom. And so again, then you have to make all your fabric double coated, or with the TPU film on one side and then maybe a coating on the other to make it all immersed in TPU. Yeah, all right, let's see. Okay, everyone's favorite topic, zippers. Okay, so the two on the left are coil zippers, and the two on the right are molded tooth zippers. And so the leftmost one is just a standard non-coated, and then the next one is a coated coil. And all we're doing with that is taking the other side of the non-coated one and like pasting polyurethane on top of it. And that's all, literally that's all it is. And let's see. Coil zippers, it's like, they work until they don't. It's like they're, the main nemesis of a coil zipper is like dirt and abrasion, usually from the inside out. So it's like if you have like the coated coil zipper there, what'll generally happen is that as you're sliding it, sliding it up and down, the slider is, really pressing in closely. And I don't have a good photo of this, but like if you go and you look really closely at the zipper, there's these little threads that hold the plastic elements together, the chain together. And what'll eventually happen, what can happen, is that dirt will form up in the slider, or there'll just be friction, and those threads can get worn out or stretch, or things get wonky, and then you get little bits of separation, and things just aren't working as well as they used to. So like that's kind of the main failure mode, if you will, of a coil zipper. We'll talk more about zippers in a minute here, but on the right is molded tooth. And these are just much larger teeth that fit together, and they're, like it says, they're molded teeth. Kind of different entirely. One of the downsides to these is they're not as easy to install, because you usually can't just sew over the end of them. Like if you look at a bag that has a coil zipper on it, you'll see like the end sewn, and no problem. But with molded teeth, that generally doesn't fly, because they're so big that as you try to sew it, like the needle of the sewing machine will explode. And I don't like that. There's also a picture there of a urethane coated molded tooth, which is what we use in all of our frame bags. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So downsides to the molded tooth are generally they're amazingly strong. Their Achilles heel is if you get something jammed in it from the outside or inside or whatever, and you just yard on it and force it and jam it and break it. You can break a tooth, and then you're kind of hosed, and you need to have the whole zipper replaced, because it may keep working without a tooth, but it might not. There's really no field fix if you break like a molded tooth zipper. The other kind of limiting thing on them is they generally like straight lines. We kind of can't do complex like curves with molded teeth zippers, because they're bigger teeth, and they don't like radiuses and curving as much. Like it just kind of would get bound up. Yeah. All right, so I think that takes us to the end of my little part one. So I would take some questions on that stuff, I guess, now.
Awesome. I just learned so much personally.
That was a lot. So yeah.
Oh, that was great. Our first question was, what is ripstop?
Yeah. So ripstop is kind of, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's when you have like a weave of fabric, and then some of those at kind of a regular spacing, and like a grid spacing, you have bigger fibers that are basically make a grid. And so it's like you have a weave of, let's just call them small. You have a weave of small yarns, and then all of a sudden you have a big one, and then you have a weave of small yarns and a big one, and it's just sort of in a grid fashion. And it does two things for you. As the name implies, if you get a rip, it'll hopefully like not propagate it when it hits the bigger yarn. And then it generally helps with just strength, overall strength. Yeah.
Awesome. I think that this is in reference to a slide that had the three types of fabrics, and the question is, and you did speak to this some, but would you have a way of synthesizing maybe the pros and cons of those types of fabrics?
Sure. It's not so much pros and cons. It's just sort of like different applications more than anything. For I think you're referring to like the one where I'd like coated or sailcloth
Mhm.
or TPU. It's
I think so.
like a lot of times we don't necessarily, well, frankly, coated, just straight up coated fabrics are like just the cheapest. So it's like if you want to make something simple and inexpensive, you can use that. And generally we use that stuff for liners where it doesn't really matter that much, what we're using. And so um, and then for stuff like frame bags, we're using the sailcloths um, because they just perform well there. They have some rigidity to them, and you also have the waterproofness. And then when we get into the TPU based stuff, we build all of our seam sealed waterproof stuff out of it because it has the coatings and the chemistry needed to be able to seal it and make things waterproof easily. Yeah. So it's not necessarily one is better than the other. It's just sort of like, well, what do you want to use it for? Yeah.
Awesome. Another question is, what's the availability of these fabrics outside of the US? If I don't know if you can speak to that.
Um, it depends if you're a manufacturer or if you're just somebody trying to buy the stuff. I don't know if you're just a consumer trying to buy some for projects, what it's like outside of the US. Um, if you're like a company trying to make stuff outside the US, yeah, it's all readily available. I guess as like a hobbyist, I just don't know of the sources that are available and like what, because it would have to be like a reseller selling it because you wouldn't probably be able to get it directly, like we do in bulk. Yeah.
Mhm. Did you have much knowledge of fabrics before starting your company?
That's a great question. No, not really at all. Yeah, I have pretty basic understanding of stuff, and yeah, I've learned tons over the years. I've had good mentors. Actually, one of the main guys. This is actually kind of a nice little shout out, actually, but a gentleman named Hale Walkoff. He ran Dimension Polyant, who was the main sailcloth company for many years. Um, like he was kind of my first contact when I started making bike bags, and he really educated me a lot on a lot of this like lamination stuff, um, and just how things are composed and woven and all that. So no, I didn't really have a big knowledge base at all. It's all been through mentors and learning from people. Another one is our friends at Alpaca. They've really been informative on a lot of the TPU based fabric because that's what they work with in packraft world. So yeah. And then, I'm dealing with it every day, so I'm always learning more.
Yeah. And related to that, so I'm sure that this has evolved over the years, or at least I know it has from my experience with all the Revelate bags. the last 14 years is Aaron would like to know, you'd like to hear examples of what Revelate bags use these different materials.
What are
And maybe that could be generalized to, are there certain fabrics that you're using for, say, frame bags versus handlebar bags, or for
Yeah, for
harnesses
sure.
versus, yeah.
For sure. Like we make all of our frame bags out of the sailcloth type materials. And kind of like those, like the coated stuff is just like the liners or the pockets, kind of the simple stuff. And like a lot of our cockpit bags as well are also made with that. For handlebar bags, we're using both. It depends on which product, but like the pronghorn, for example, is using that the UHMWPE stuff that's woven, and then we hand tape it, like to get the double-ended dry bags. So that's kind of what the pronghorn is. For the TPUs, that's what we're also doing for all of our welded stuff. So like the dry bags and the terrapin, and like the polecat fork bags. Just a lot of the dry bags are made out of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then the nano panniers are also made out of the UHMWPE stuff as well.
Do you use EcoPack? Is it really more eco-friendly? Are there trade-offs?
Yeah, we do, and that's when I'm just saying sailcloth. That is what we're using. So that gentleman I mentioned, Hale, he actually brought that to the market, which is really cool. He basically wanted to develop a recycled line of this stuff, and would jump through all the hoops to have it developed and like get the factory going on, the non-VOC adhesives to make it all work, and the fully recycled, content of the outer polyester and just the whole thing, because it's multiple layers and multiple, with all this stuff going together, and they all had to be recycled and be environmental friendly. And a big part of that is also something I didn't talk about, which I should, but is DWR. And so it has a C0 DWR, and the C0 essentially means now I'm like drawing a mind blank. What does C0 mean? It's essentially CFC, non-chlorofluorocarbon, durable water repellent. So like the outer surface of the stuff uses a wax-based repellent for water than a fluorocarbon, which is bad for the environment, so that was a really long-winded answer. So yes, we do use EcoPack. But yeah, we personally knew the guy that brought it to life. Yeah. So yeah.
Cool. There are a couple more questions that I think will be answered in the next section or will fit into the end Q&A. So I think we'll end with this for this Q&A because we're about halfway through our 90 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. Well, I'm excited. I could keep talking about that stuff all day, but I'm excited to keep going on this. Since we're a bag company, we deal with warranty. We see it all come back to us, and so this is really good. I want to talk about just cleaning and just some basic stuff for repair, right? The biggest rule is to just never throw your nice bike packing bag into the washing machine. Just don't do it. Yeah, nothing's made for that. It's not a fleece jacket. Things, especially if there's any Velcro involved, it'll just sort of like, sort of slowly rip itself apart. And the fabric, there's these laminated fabrics and stuff, and they're really not intended to go into a washing machine or dryer. So just hand wash it, you know, a little bucket of soap, a little bucket of water, mild soap, line it to dry. A good thing you can do also is flip the whole thing inside out and clean it from the inside, because that's where all the manky stuff gets in, all your food junk, you know. Um, yeah, just using a mild soap, and I'll talk about zippers in a second. But yeah, so on the bottom of this slide, I show a bunch of stuff. And the kind of the left side I would consider like my home care kit, and like the little bit on the right is more like stuff I may or may not bring with me on a trip. Um, and so let's talk about that stuff real quick. Number one is isopropyl alcohol. A big thing of that is it'll really clean the surface of whatever you're trying to. And this gets a little more into repair. Like if you're just basically cleaning that, no, you don't have to scrub things to isopropyl alcohol. But if you're making a repair, you really do want to clean it with isopropyl alcohol, because it'll completely clean off all the dirt. And I was even told once it sort of like gets the the bonds of the molecules ready for action or something like that. But if you're gonna like bond something to it, it sort of like preps the surface for bonding, either whether it's glue or adhesive. It makes a big difference. Then we have some like zipped care, which is just sort of like a zipper, sort of cleaner slash lubricant stuff. You may or may not even want to use that, just if you keep your zippers clean. The next one is a tube of seam grip, and seam grip is also aqua seal. You can use either one. If you have the little jar of accelerant that comes with it, that just speeds up the drying time, which is nice. And then we have a seam ripper. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but like seam rippers are really handy for modifying things, and sometimes fixing things. And then I threw this in, a sewing awl. Like they're a little overpowered for bike bags and a lot of gear, like some gear repair. But if you put like a smaller needle in them, then it becomes a little more practical. But I'm kind of out of the get-go with the heavy thread and that big heavy needle. It's a little overpowered, but like the function still applies. Okay. Getting onto the other side, the right side, is stuff I would probably bring with me. I almost always travel with on trips is of that little tube of UV Cure Aqua Seal. And that stuff is amazing, because if you puncture your sleeping pad or have any kind of something you need to glue regarding gear, like if you clean it, that stuff will bond and dry in the UV in like less than a minute. And so I've like punctured sleeping pads and fixed them like no problem. Um, and then the other thing is just some fabric repair patches, or repair tape. Everyone's probably used to dealing with that stuff. Really handy to have. Um, and then a Leatherman can come in handy if you're field sewing something. So I do have a needle and thread there. And you might want a mini Leatherman or something like that to push a needle through something if you're trying to hand sew something. You could bring a thimble, but like no one's gonna bring a thimble, right? And then I have some spare buckles. All right, let's talk more about zippers. Again, I just say clean with an old toothbrush. If you flip the bag inside out, a lot of times the damage of coil zippers is from the inside out, because of what I was talking about, the abrasions of those little threads. So the picture of these sliders, you can see they're a little different, right? Like that slot on the left one is on the top, and on the other one it's on the bottom. And what's going on there is, if you actually, this is your homework, go look at a coil zipper, and you'll see that like one side has like, the chain is sort of dropped on one side and the other side's fairly flat. So if you have like one of those water resistant ones, the flat side is on top where the shiny stuff is, and the kind of the actual chain is below it. So then you would be using the one with the tooth, that little slot on the top, and the one on the right is sort of a normal one. Yeah. The technical term for the other one is reverse. So it's It's a reverse slider if it's basically upside down. Okay, oh boy, here we go. All right. This is a really quick video I made on replacing a slider if the end is sewn in. And this assumes that you can sew or hand sew the end thing back together. So I'm just gonna roll this real quick. It's pretty short. But again, so when these are sewn, there's stitches over the end of the zipper. So you have to flip the bag inside out and like be able to open up that end of the zipper. And right there, that's what I'm talking about. So you gotta pop that thread open, boom. And now like you should be able to open it up. And I'm not gonna, this doesn't show actually showing the whole slider going on, but you'd fit it in there and replace the slider. And then you're stuck with having to close it back up again. You know, if you were really careful, you could just use it like that and make sure you don't slide the end off the zipper again. But you probably want to sew it or find somebody that would just sew that thing shut again. So it's not rocket science. I mean, a lot of people are scared of zippers, but you know, oops, here we go again. I'm in the infinite loop. Oh, I guess I did go to the next slide. Next slide. Sorry, bad segue. Okay, field repair kit. When you're going about thinking about like a repair kit to bring on a trip, let's say, obviously you want to think about like, well, what's the worst case that can happen? What's you know, is it like a deal breaker if you know a piece of gear fails or rips, or is it like just an inconvenience? Does it matter? You know, if you're doing a winter trip and you know you have a sleeping pad blowout, it's a big deal. You want to be able to fix a sleeping pad. Whereas in the summer, if you're in a forested area, you know, it's not the end of the world. Anyway, I like bringing like versatile things. The example of that is like, you know, the repair tape and the little tubes of Aquaseal or the UV Cure Aquaseal. Again, Tyvek tape works really, really well because it's airtight. Just a couple little things like that, maybe a needle and a thread, really you can fix so many things. But you know, just think through what you have with you. You know, if you're using a tent, to be like, well, am I going to am I going to Patagonia? Might I break a tent pole? You know, think about a way to patch a tent pole. And then, you know, on like long trips, I think if you're doing like a really long trip, you know, clothing mending is kind of a deal. Like you want to be able to like sew up little pieces of holes in your tights and your clothes and stuff that come along because then you end up in tatters. So learning a little bit of basic hand sewing is really beneficial. Okay, this is a cool one. So this just shows a quick like tear in a bag. So we got this hole. You know, this isn't a dry bag. So you got this ugly tear. What are you gonna do about it? Well, the first thing I would do is clean it with isopropyl alcohol. And then I'm going to use a piece of fabric repair tape with the corners rounded off and just stick it on there once the alcohol's dried. And then this is just using seam grip. I'm doing this one-handed and recording it the other, so it's not really the best job, but eventually, you know, you're covering the outside with seam grip, and eventually I just covered the whole thing with seam grip. And then that dries and it's a permanent, really, really durable fix because you know, not only do you have the repair tape on there, but you're covering the whole thing with, you know, a urethane, like basically glue layer. My video transitions are really hurting. Oh boy, gotta exit again. Okay, this will show real quick like a female buckle replacement. This is a little more advanced, but figured it'd be kind of cool to see that, it's not the end of the world if you have to um, fix a female buckle. The problem with female buckles is they're usually bar tacked in place or heavily stitched in place. And so for this, you have to rip out a bar tack. And the main strategy for ripping out a bar tack is using a seam ripper and going crosswise through all the zigzags on it and just trying to like open all those up. See like how I'm digging in under all the zigzags? And you kind of like keep at it for a minute and eventually you'll get it pretty weak where then you can get on the other side and start like pulling it apart and then you can rip out those. And then put a new one in. And this is assuming you have a sewing machine, but if you don't, you can hand sew it. You can sew it on with an awl. There's options. Yeah. Oh my God, it is. Okay. Bad things happen. It's like, I think having you know, believing in yourself that you can fix things is kind of a big deal. Like, being resourceful and like the title says, have a can-do mindset. It's like, when bad things happen, you can, if you just sort of think about it and put your time in, you can usually fix it. And keep going. Like there's a bunch of bad things here. On the left, this is not exactly bike related, but that was a pack raft that got slashed by a brown bear, and it had like gigantic holes all over it. But we just sewed it together, and eventually aqua sealed it, and it was usable again. The other panel is a sil nylon mid that got wrecked, and just sewed these giant just kept sewing using dental floss and got it to be usable again. And then Kate told me that there's a later webinar on bike repair stuff. And so I'm not really gonna get into that, but it sort of ties into this gear repair that having a little bit of sewing knowledge goes a long way because you can, fix sidewall tears and that sort of thing. Okay, that's the end of that part. I had to put a wintry photo in there because it's like 0 and tons of snow here.
Love it. All right, the questions are rolling in. That was awesome. Okay, can you talk about closing different types of threads and needles for different fabrics? And excellent information so far.
Thanks. Let's see, different types of threads and needles. Well, let's just talk about the thread side real quick. In like bag world, we're generally using what's called T70 thread, which is Tech 70 weight. Yeah, I would start there in the T70 range. That's like kind of a go-to. If you're bringing something for like repair, you might want to go stronger because you're generally not going to do as good of a job for like a field repair, and you might want it to be stronger with less stitches. Like that sidewall. It's like I would want really really beefy thread for that, but am I going to carry 2 different threads with me? No. But yeah, if you're doing like homework, like home build, like building stuff for yourself or whatever, T70. Some home sewing machines can't handle that, so you might have to go lower. And then needles in like the 18 to 20 range. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Oster MFG buckles, especially on load-bearing buckles?
They're really nice. Yeah, those look really nice. I haven't had a chance to use them. People might hate me to say this, but they're probably way overkill. We have a similar plastic part that we've never had a failure on, and we've tested them to like 140 pounds. Well, I've actually stood up, like body weight stood just on one holding webbing. So it's like people see those and they're like, oh, they're amazing. They're so much stronger than like the plastic buckles. And it's like, yeah, they are. They might hold 1,000 pounds. I don't know, but so I think they're beautiful. I think I love what they're doing. But like as far as using them on bags, I feel like it's pretty overkill because, like I said, we've on the cam buckles, we're using this similar spring-loaded cams on our seat bags, and we've been using them for 6 years or more and haven't had a single failure with tens of thousands of them out there. And they're awesome, and they're far cheaper. Like, so yeah.
We have, let's see. Are there recommendations for cleaning and protecting bags from UV, like a 303 type product?
I don't have much experience with that, honestly. I generally the stuff we use is it's not really an issue. Like, I think if you're using like some cheap like it's sort of like you get what you pay for, right? It's like if you're using like some cheap fabric that doesn't have a good, structure and good coating to begin with, then yeah, you might want to use a product like that, but like for any reputable bag that's out there now, I wouldn't bother because it's gonna probably just, I mean, it's not gonna hurt anything, but I don't think it's really gonna be any benefit either. Yeah.
Can you talk about the difference in strength between a 3 to 5 by stitch and a bar tack, and also polyester thread versus nylon thread?
Can you say the first part that we got, the triple something?
Like a triple stitch versus bar tack?
Okay. I'm gonna guess that means like a triple stitch where you're going like back and forth and back and forth and back and forth versus a bar tack. I hope that's right. Yeah, it depends. So a bar tack this is good. A bar tack, basically, the machine comes down and it does a quick back and forth, and then does the zigzags, and then it ties off. It like kind of like does a closing stitch at the end. And the benefit of the bar tack is you get the width of these like little zigzags in there over the course of like 40 something stitches in an area. I don't have any like data for this one as far as like, well, what's stronger, because we generally, if we're going to reinforce something, we're going to sew it and then bar tack it. And I think, yeah, I don't have the best answer, honestly. That's what it comes down to. Yeah. What was the second part of that, I guess?
The polyester versus nylon thread.
Okay, polyester versus nylon thread. Sure. Again, it comes down to the UV resistance, like long term. The proof of this would be like anything in the marine world uses polyester thread, like because it's going to get blasted by sun out on a boat all day, So everything marine is UV thread. That's not to say you don't need might not necessarily mean that. Like a lot of backpacks are made using nylon thread because it's like the seam binding on the inside of a pack, and it's like what UV resistance is it going to have? So, and like the strength is just varied by like, well, is it bonded? Is it normal? Is it bonded? Is it unbonded? Is it, what weight is it? Yeah. So it's like apples and oranges, I guess. We use bonded polyester in all of our stuff. Yeah, for what it's worth.
Yeah. The waterproof molded zippers seem very hard to source. Where can you get them?
Oof. Yeah, we have to import those, and I don't think that there is a like you can just go buy them someplace, source for them. So yeah, sorry, bad answer. But YKK does make some smaller ones that are like number fives that are AquaGuard molded tooth that I think are available just to purchase. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, the ones we use are from, it's mostly driven by like the wetsuit industry. And like, it's sort of like marine wetsuit. And then we're using them on frame bags.
Someone asked a question that I'm going to kind of elaborate on into a broader question for you. And so the specific question is, are your nano panniers waterproof? But my way to expand that for everyone would be how personally I see an often misconception that people think all their bike bags are waterproof if the material is waterproof. And so how would you guide people to knowing if the bag is actually waterproof?
Yeah.
And so I guess that's two. First, the nano panniers.
Yeah. Well, currently they are not, but they were made with very minimal seams. Like there's actually taped seams in the nano panniers, but there's a perimeter seam that's not, because when you have pieces of webbing and attachments and stuff like that in a seam or coming out of a seam, it's then very difficult to actually like tape it and like make it waterproof. And it's again that fabric, harking back to the beginning of this, that fabric only works well with literally hand taping the stuff like on a flat surface, like by hand. So anytime you have like curves, you basically can't do it. That said, things may change. So yeah, they aren't. But yeah, Kait brings a good point of waterproof fabric versus waterproof product. It's like you can make anything out of waterproof fabric, but it's not necessarily going to make a waterproof like end product. And so, part of that fabric discussion was, how do you make things waterproof, and like, why can't you just make everything waterproof? Like, why can't we make all these frame bags waterproof? It's sort of like, well, it's like there's geometry limitations, there's fabric limitations with what what you're using. So there's a lot of reasons why something may or may not be fully waterproof. Yeah.
Awesome. We have a couple broader questions that will be good at the end, but I think maybe it looks like we have about 20 minutes left. So let's
Well, that's perfect, because like, the last part of this is a little quick. Let's see. Okay, but yeah, I guess I just wanted to talk a little bit about stepping away from like the gear and actual like using the gear. Some of this I think was talked about in other webinars, but I was like optimizing the bag systems you have. You got some bikepacking bags, and like how to use them in a smart way. And I thought that the best thing is like, well, really think about like what your route is. Is it easy, hard? Are the days long? Are they short? Well, then knowing all that, you kind of have to pack accordingly. It's like if it's hard, long days, well, then you're not going to be camping much. You're not going to be hanging out in camp much. You're going to be like crashing and like doing it again the next day, Whereas if it's easy and short days, then hey, you can afford some luxuries, And a big thing is, coming from like traditional touring to like a bike packing thing is like, it's just not going to hold as much stuff, So you have to be realistic about just the overall volume of things you have. Yeah, then a big one is not being a junk show. Like there's the like dangle stuff off the bike, have your sandals kind of strapped down here, have your mug tied down here, have like your Bluetooth speaker tied off here. It's like, just because we can volet strap stuff to anything now doesn't mean we should. Because I think at the end of the day, like all those little attachments that are flopping around are going to drive you crazy. You might lose some of them. And the more you have to fiddle with your stuff, kind of the more it just zaps the fun for me. Like anytime I've had like a fiddly gear situation for whatever reason, it's just sort of like, yeah, it keeps you from focusing on like what you really want to be enjoying, you know? Um, and then the last point here is like adopting a minimalist mindset of like each little choice, be like, oh yeah, I got my water filter. Well, you know, do you need a water filter? Can you just get by with iodine? Do you even need iodine? Are you going to be drinking from like snowmelt, beautiful streams? Like, you know, just sort of like that, like double think some of the choices you might make to really slim down the stuff you're bringing. Like, do I need my pillow? For me, yeah, but you know, do you really need a pillow? um, yeah. A little bit of packing strategies. Kate and I were talking about this off before this was like, you know, just if you're going to kind of buy one thing or have one thing, it should be the frame bag. Because, oh, by the way, we make frame bags now. Because it's obviously the most central thing that can hold a lot of dense, heavy things like in the best center of gravity on the bike. I feel like when I'm kind of doing almost anything with a bike without a frame bag, I'm kind of like naked. I'm like, where do I put my stuff? Because like all my water goes in there. I'll like just it can just swallow things. Yeah. Um, yeah. So this was a little bit tied into that last one as far as like gear that works with the carrying systems you have. So okay, we're just talking about frame bags, right? So well, what water bladder might work best in the frame bag? Um, like what cooking pot, if you're bringing a cooking pot, like what can be thin enough to fit in there? And like how do you really optimize the space? Like what can you cram up in the very most front section and just sort of like tuck it away, or like what works best like along the seat tube, for instance, like thinking through those kind of things as far as like both weight distribution and like accessibility. Um, and like things you're just not really going to use that much that can be kind of stowed and like forgotten about versus things you want access to. Um, yeah, another one is packing tight and close to the bike. I would call it is really like really kind of compressing the heck out of things, and just getting the weight of things as tight to the bike as you can. It's just worth an extra minute or two it takes to like pack something correctly, because your bike's going to work a lot better. The other thing I'll mention is with seat bags in particular. A lot of people, we have to kind of walk through, like if you're accessing stuff out of a seat bag or kind of anything with compression, right? Is that after you like mess with it, you kind of have to like reset things. It's like if things are all tight and you just open the closure and you pull something out and roll it up again, that's like, well, now you might not be able to push something in there because the compression straps are too tight. So it's like you kind of need to like get your thing out and like loosen the compression straps, like shove everything in tight again, and off you go. And then like my last point is something I've started doing more and more is having little organizer bags. You know, you can kind of get them anywhere now, that fit the spaces that you want to fill up. You know, like that spot in the frame bag along the seat tube, I kind of use one of those like long skinny ones that you could put socks in, and like I'll put food in that. And you know, they're great with panniers with like, you know, food, like you can put all your dehydrated meals in like, you know, a pod or something. Yeah, it just helps you be more organized and fit things easier, so it's just easier to pack and faster. Yeah. All right, I think this is my last slide. Yeah, empower yourself to tweak the gear, just like your bike parts, right? Like, that's like shortening straps, like cutting Velcro so it doesn't hit your leg if there's Velcro straps. You know, just, you know, if you need like a strap keeper for something, you know, like rubber O-rings, you can get at any hardware store imaginable. Like you can just use O-rings to like contain straps or loose ends, and just sort of trimming junk. It's sort of like a lot of things come with, you know, bungee cords and molly things, and it's like, well, if you do you need it? Do you, you know, if you're going to use it, great, but if you're not, just take it off, you know. Um, and then yeah, my last you know, since I sew all the time, it's like I strongly advise like learning how to sew in some degree or form, because you know, you can fix so many things. You'll impress your friends, and you know, you can keep kind of making your gear last longer and your clothing last longer, and yeah, spend less money and waste less stuff. So I think that's all I got.
Awesome. That was so well done. We have a variety of questions, and so we'll finish this session with all of those. And if as you're processing all that, if you do have more questions, do put them in the Q&A. Let's see, starting from the beginning of this, early on, we had a question from someone who's very happy with how Revelate bags fit their 16-year-old Moots mountain bike perfectly. And do you anticipate custom bag options being available in the future at Revelate?
Probably not, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah, I don't really see custom frame bags happening anytime soon again. Yeah, it's sort of a bridge we had to cross a number of years ago. I was making them all. Well, I'm sorry, Dusty was too. Um, yeah, and it's sort of we have so many products we want to make, and if we're gonna make more things in house, it's probably going to be something more of a production bag instead of a one-off. Yeah.
Makes sense. Kurt Rev Snyder wants to know how to sew a pedal back on when it comes off the spindle, and someone else that wants to know what you actually did because you probably didn't sew it.
You guys calling me out on that one, huh? Because like, you're right. I didn't fix that.
Oh, well,
No,
it's
I rode that for like 30 miles like that.
oof.
So yeah, you got me.
Well, at least the good thing about pedals is there's two of them.
Yeah, and you can still pedal a spindle.
Yeah. Kind of following up from the bar tack type stitch question, if you don't have a bar tack machine, you have an industrial sewing machine, what could you do instead of a bar tack?
I would probably do what this person probably suggested, was just going back and forth over the thing a number of times. I mean, that's fine. Generally when we're doing like inside seams and we have a piece of webbing or something that's structural anyway, we'll go back over it anyway. Even if we're going to bar tack it later, it's almost just by habit. You're like, oh, you know, this is a strong thing, so like go back and forth a few times and then keep going. The only thing to consider is perforations and just the beefiness of whatever you're doing. Like if you have like a lot of layers of material and webbing, you can kind of go to town. But if it's you know, if it's light, if there's only like 2 layers and you know it's lightweight stuff, you really have to start watching like just how many holes you're putting in something. So that's the only limit. Yeah.
Awesome. This is a great question. Where can you learn to sew if you don't already know how?
Yeah, probably YouTube. I don't have a good answer to that.
That's a good answer.
Sorry. Yeah. You know, gosh, I'll have to think about that. Um, yeah.
This would be a good one that if anyone listening has recommendations that they know of, put them in the chat.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things, like if you just start doing it, um, you'll kind of figure it out eventually. Just, you know, to some degree or another. There's a difference between like figuring it out and making something versus like production industrial sewing. But it's like, you know, if you want to make yourself stuff, like I think if you just start small, you know, make a stuff sack, and then you'll be like, oh, this is awesome. Yeah.
Nice.
That's how I started. Yeah.
Any tips for sizing or fitting a frame bag?
Oh yeah. Well, the best friend is a ruler, and I think most companies these days have um, pretty darn good sizing information. Like on our website, we have like full-on printable PDFs that you can like print all out and tape together, and they'll make a big template. Um, but yeah, the best would just be to, the best measurement is underneath the top tube, just from like there to there, and that's like the critical measurement, because it's like if you can get the top length right and it's the general size bike, you're in the right ballpark. But yeah, just diligent measuring. And honestly, in emailing the company, it's like whoever you're buying it from, just tell them what bike you're putting it on and like send them some dimensions and they'll guide you, hopefully.
Nice. Two people want to know where this photo that's currently up was taken.
Yeah, I pulled it out of a folder from Mark and Hannah's Chile, Argentina end of their trip. So it's somewhere in like Chilean or Argentine Patagonia, along the border zone. Yeah. So I can't say exactly where though. I could find out easily because but I don't know off the top of my head.
Cool.
Yeah.
There's a question about packing suggestions for bike packing in bear country or other critters, which we're going to talk about in the second to last workshop more, but given that you live in Alaska, if you have any specific advice.
Oh,
One thing, I've never bike packed with a bear canister and don't have advice for how to carry a bear canister.
yeah. I I don't use bear canisters up here. I use Ursacks, because generally, yeah, because yeah, canisters are difficult to use. The only ones I like, well, they're really difficult to bike with. Goodness, you essentially have to have a rack somehow, and then it's this like awkward hard object you need to figure out how to put on a rack. So Ursacks are great. Um, the only issue with Ursacks is that critters can still gnaw. Like the material they make those things with is UHMWP, but it's like really big fibers that can withstand a bear. But critters can kind of rip and poke little holes in Ursacks. So it's not like a perfect solution. But I use Ursacks, and generally, we generally don't have big trees, so I don't do any of this whole like hanging from a tree thing. So I just go far away and hide it. Try to put some boulders on top of it or rocks on top of it, depending on how much I really feel like that night. Yeah.
I love picturing you moving boulders in Alaska on top of your food. Yeah, that's great. I agree that the Ursacks are great.
Yeah.
Seam sealer looks ideal for repair. Are there reasons it doesn't seem to be used for waterproofing bags?
Like the liquid seam sealer, is that what you're?
I think that's what they're referring to, kind of like Aqua Seal.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Say that question again. Like, are there a reason for waterproofing?
Is there a reason, like, it was in, I think that you had some in your repair kit, and so I think this person is asking, like, why is it not being used in the manufacturing side of the bag for waterproofing?
Yeah, well, there's just better ways to do it. I mean, like seam taping does the job just much better, and you don't have like this liquid that needs to cure and dry and make a mess. And it's like the seam taping process is like a continuous, like it's almost like you're sewing, but you're not, like running it through a machine, and it's doing it, and it's once it comes off, it's done. It doesn't have to like dry or anything. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
There are two questions, and these are I think the last two questions about mounting. One is specifically a mag tank, and other just other bags to older frames with exposed cabling or housing.
Yep.
Yeah, Yeah, so any advice for mounting bags over housing that's outside of the
Yeah,
frame?
I mean, if there's housing there, just put it over it, no problem, because you're not going to affect it that much. It's like it's the open cables that's the issue, and I guess the worst case is top mounted exposed cables, like your old Yeti or something, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I think they're talking about that.
Yeah. One thing you could do is just put it on and see if it's a problem. You know what I mean? Like, see if it actually messes with anything, because sometimes there's enough spring tension on either end that it just is going to pull that cable through, like, and not really affect anything. The other is to put a little sleeve on those exposed cables, in which case you'd have to, undo it and put, gosh, I forget where to get that stuff. I used to have some, but it's essentially like, a really small straw. Or you could even just take a piece of cable housing, a dummy piece of cable housing, and just slide it on there wherever the bag's going to sit, and then run your cable back. And so the bummer about that is you have to undo the cable to do that. But that would be kind of the surefire thing. That's what comes to mind off the top of my head. But yeah, if the exposed cables are on the underside of the top tube, then you might be able to just put the strap underneath the cables and tighten it and sort of not have it be an issue. Yeah.
Awesome. I think those are all the questions that I have been able to keep track of.
Cool.
Yeah. All the questions in the Q&A at least. Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. That was very informative. I learned a ton, and it seems like people were picking up a lot based on the questions.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to answer whatever other questions come up if somebody wants to reach out somehow. So yeah.
Looks like Kurt wants to see the new puppy again, but
She's not here.
he might have missed that opportunity.
You just roll that video on replay.
Yeah. That it will be in the live recording. So if you want to see Eric's puppy again, the live recording and the chat will be emailed by the end of the week. So,
Okay. Thanks,
thank you
everybody.
so much, Eric.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you so
everyone.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye.